All right, well, good morning. I'm Gaines Harman. We're here in the Odessadale Church this morning, and we're going to talk about the history of the church and the background of the area, really, which pretty much defines the history of the church, the whole community. The settlers came in here in about 1828, and that's when we first started having the ministry in the area. Prior to that was the treaties that we had, 1825, 1826, with the Creek Indians that moved them out of the area west of the Flint River. And we were able to, or some settlers were able to move in from that time. I was surprised to see that in 1828, we actually had a movement within the Methodist Episcopal Church out of South Carolina, the convention there, where they set up some circuits over in Georgia. One of the main ones was in Athens, and then Athens set up a circuit in LaGrange. And that circuit serviced Troup County, Meriwether County, part of Harris, and part of Heard. So we had our first session here in this area out of that circuit in what is now Camp Viola, in that area, by the Evans family. And the Evans family and the Partridge family, I think, were the two most dominant families that supported the movement of the Methodist Episcopal in the area. So that was in the cabin of Thomas and Martha Evans around Camp Viola, around Mountville. And then they had, by the fall of 1828, they had actually built a structure, built our first meeting house, and called it Mount Pleasant Methodist Episcopal Church. And they built that on Highway 109 up here across from what is now the Keith Road. It's where the Needmore Cemetery is up there now. So they were there in 1828, and that's when we have the first mention of some folks from Odessadale going to that particular church there. So the meeting place was there, and then they decided within a few years, I think around 1840, they moved to their second location, which was across from the Partridge place. And the Partridges had a big place on what is now Keith Road. A lot of land over there, and they moved to that location. The previous meeting place, the first one, was turned into a Baptist church called Hebron Baptist, and that's another story in itself. But we moved over to that location, and many folks from this area went to that one to church. And then around 1870, it moved to the third location and the final location before we came back to Odessadale. That third location is where the Mountville Cemetery is now. And that church was there. We attended that church into the early 1890s. And as mentioned, that church had many necessary changes made and updates made to that church. And before that church moved to where the Mountville Church is right now, we moved back to this area and started worship in what was called the Academy, which was across the road from here was a schoolhouse. So we actually started worship there in 1893. So the Odessadale Church started at that point in time. What had happened is we got a lot of growth around the 1890 period of time. That's when the railroad came in 1890. I was across the road. The big reason it was here was primarily cotton. Had a lot of cotton in this area. That other than just crops that folks needed to sustain themselves, cotton was the big moneymaker. So, I mean, you can look around here now and you see trees, it was all cotton fields. They talk about you could see almost from here to Stovall, 4 miles away, because it was nothing but cotton. The other thing we had here was a quarry. And the quarry was across the road on Highway 109. They had a spur from the railroad to the quarry. So we had two businesses here that brought in the railroad. That railroad was supposed to run from Macon to Birmingham. I don't think they ever finished it, but they took a lot of cotton out of here at that point in time. So that was kind of the reason our population from the census said that we went from like 150 to 190, 191, and they decided they needed a church here. So we met in the academy across the road, and then in 1896 they started looking at building a church, and there is a deed that is with Odessa Thompson. Odessa Thompson owned all this property. The deed's kind of hard to read, but we had to look it up later on. I'll talk about that in a minute for some different things we had to do in 2019. But that deed is on page 722 and 723 of Book 1. There's a lot of books in Meriwether County. It's probably 200, 300, 400 of them, and we're in Book 1. 722 to 723, if anybody wants to look it up. It's all in handwriting, but it establishes that, see if I can read, excuse me there on the mic. This was to James C. Harman, James Calvin Harman, your ancestor, by the way, Tim, John Parham, David Harman, Merriman Harman, William Marchman, J.A. Glanton, that had the Glanton store, and C.W. Harman, who I think is Cornelius. All of them were trustees of the Odessadale Methodist Episcopal Church. And we paid $35 for a half acre for this lot here, which was adjacent to the academy or the school lot over there. So in 1897, we started, and I think the church was built during that period of time. It included a cemetery, and at that, Johnny, who's in the back window here, I'm sure you'll show later, Johnny Glanton, was a 6-year-old child, and she died in 1896, and they put a window in this church especially for her, and she was the first one buried in the cemetery back there. So we had the church going at that point in time. I've got, and I'm going to do it here in a minute, but I'm going to look at some of the record books. When we cleaned out this back cabinet back here, we found that mice had gotten in there, but we were able to salvage 2 Sunday school books. One of them covered the 1909, 10, and 11 time frame, and the other one covers 1922 and 23 time frame. So got a pretty good idea of the number of people that were coming. In those books, it's interesting. They would report the number of people that were present, but they would also report the number of people that were absent, which we don't typically do now. So we get a pretty good idea of what the membership was of the church during that time frame. And it seems that at the height of this church, which would have been around probably the 1900, 1910 time frame, we had about 80 folks, 80 members in this church. And then some things happened in the community that affected this church greatly. The main thing that happened was the boll weevil, believe it or not. The cotton crops that were so abundant here, we lost 85% production on those crops, which was just devastating to the community. And people started moving out The railroad moved out in 1923, and after that, things just people just moved out. The big families sold their farms and moved out, and pretty much cotton was not near as big as it was, and you started to see properties converted to tree farms and that sort of thing after that period of time. So our membership kind of went down, and I would say the next thing I was looking at by the 20s, we still had, in the early 20s, we still had about 60 folks in membership, and then it went down to about 40, and of course now, believe it or not, we still have about 20 or 25 people that claim membership. Not all of them come to the church. What I found has been pretty consistent is whatever the membership is in the church, you normally have about half of those that actually attend. So that may not be every time, but it is pretty much through these books that whatever your membership is, you got about half of those that actually attend the church. What I wanted to do was go through some of the books. This is from 1911, and I was talking about this earlier. What they did is it's kind of different the way they set up Sunday school here. We had officers of the church. The first officer was Ms. Harris, as best I could tell. Mr. Dillard was an officer. I'm not sure who he was. And then Kate Glanton became an officer, or the chairperson of the church later on. So we had 3 officers, but apparently it was situated that we had what was called teachers and scholars. And the teachers, of course, were teachers of classes. And each teacher was apparently assigned a group of scholars. So back in February 19th, we had 14 scholars present. We had 31 scholars absent, and there was only one teacher that was here at that point in time. The 85 cents was the collection at that point in time. And I was just looking through this book, and December the 17th, the opening song was "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." And the subject of the lesson was Ezra teaches the group here. And so a lot of this stuff was from the Old Testament too. I was surprised to see that. We had 4 teachers present, 3 absent, and then we had scholars present was 28. The weather was clear. We had 2 visitors, and 63 cents was the collection. But I saw this one. This is from August the 15th, 1909. I don't understand these books. They start off with 11, and it's like they didn't, and then it goes to 1909, so I'm not sure how they did these things. But on August 15th, 1909, we had only 1 teacher present. We had 6 that were not present, and that's underlined. 6 not present, okay? We had 18 scholars present, and he didn't even bother to put who was not present. But the reason I mentioned that, this is Robert Watson was the secretary. And Robert Watson writes in his notes that it makes my heart sad to see how little interest is manifest in Sunday school and all the church work that is to be done. So Robert was not happy with the number of people that were attending the church at that point in time. Robert married some Harman sisters, so technically he was kind of in the family. Looking at in those, the kind of the high was in the 80 range of the number of folks that were members of the church. I look here, now this goes, and it skipped over from, that goes to 1912, this goes to 22 and 23. It picks up with 22 and 23. And they had the same setup in here This is when Kate Glanton, our Aunt Kate Glanton, she conducted the service, and we had 6 teachers present and 4 absent, and we had 32 scholars present and 38 absent. So that still is up around the 80 that we had in 22. But it went down significantly after that. By 27, in 1923, as I said, 22, 23, we had 80 members. By 1927, we had 73 members. That's when the railroad closed. And then by 1939, in 1939, we had 45 members. So originally, Odessadale, and you can look at on the internet, it's out there on Elm Street. You had here at that point in time in the early 1900s, before the railroad left, you had a doctor's office, you had a pharmacy, you had a couple of hardware stores. I don't know what a grocery store was called then, but you had those. You had a seed store, you had a cotton gin. Anything else? Lumberyard. Yeah, and I know we had warehouses.
You had cottonseed oil mills too.
Cottonseed oil mill, yep. So, I mean, it was a thriving community as long as the railroad was here. We had a boarding house here up on the hill, so it was really going strongly up until the railroad left and the cotton market just crashed. And we've pretty much gone downhill. By the 1950s, we had about 25 members here in the church, and we've still got about 20. And we had a service yesterday. This is Monday, and we had 8 people here yesterday. We normally have a few more than that, but we very rarely crack the high teens we have before. But as far as the church itself, I think it's something to be noted that there has been very little change in this church since it was originally built. What I can remember, I remember actually the pot-bellied stove, and you can see where the flue went up into the ceiling. I can remember when that was here. Apparently, according to Leo Partridge, that came out in about 50-51. The windows were changed from clear glass to this colored glass in about that same time frame. So they did a couple of things here in the church. You can see up in the ceiling you can't, but it's up there where they used to hang the lantern and let it up and down, because they did have some night services in this church, and they probably had other lanterns in here as well. I think when they took the pot-bellied stove out, they put in these gas heaters. And other than that, I don't think there's been a whole lot done to change this church. The other thing that was talked about I thought was interesting is Mother talked about there was wallpaper on all these walls. And she said at some point, it must have been in the 30s or 40s, that they took the wallpaper off, and your father Calvin said, when they saw this underneath, and said, we don't ever need to put anything back. So thank goodness they didn't, and this beautiful wood was exposed. When we were going through this cabinet back here, which was the only storage in the church, that small cabinet, slid in beside there, we pulled out a piece of wallpaper. And apparently it was a gray wallpaper with some geometric things on it. And so it was a pretty wallpaper, but I'm sure I'm glad they didn't put it back. The church has had to have some extensive work done on it. We did that about 10 or 12 years ago. If you come in, you'll see that there's wires up here. What happens when you have a church that's 50-something feet long and 30-something feet wide, which is what this church is and you have no columns or anything holding it up, the walls started to bow out. This wall on the south side actually bowed out about 3 feet. And we had noticed that the floor was creeping out. Had it gone out much further, it could have collapsed the whole thing. So 10 or 12 years ago, we put a new roof on it, and we had to have the pilings changed out. They were crumbling underneath this church. It's held up on 3x3 cube pilings in most places underneath the church. And we had the wires put in, and we had these wires corresponding underneath and pull the whole church back together. So we're hoping that it'll be here another 127, 28 years or so. But that's some of the things that we've had to do to keep this thing going. Like I said, we still have Sunday school here every Sunday. At 10 o'clock, we have church once a week. Up until 25 years ago, as we started on a circuit, we were still on a circuit, meaning we shared ministers with Big Springs and Mountville. About 25, 26 years ago, because their size was larger than ours, we went and we had a minister that's just serves this church one time a month. And she's been with us, Diane, for that period of time too. So we still have a minister that comes here once a month, and then we have Sunday school on the other Sundays. Now let's take a break here. I would like for us to go around and actually film some of the characteristics of the church, and maybe in the back of the church, and we'll do that right now, and then we'll come back. This is the original sign that I remembered. You can't read it now, but it says Methodist Church, Odessadale, organized 1897. The church name has changed several times. As we talked about, it was originally the Methodist Episcopal Church, and then sometime, I don't know, 30s, 40s, 50s, we dropped the Episcopal part, and it became the Methodist Church. And then in the, I guess, 50s, 60s, it became the United Methodist Church. And so, but what happened in 2019, the United Methodists changed some of their rules on, or some of their preferences on small churches, and we were one of the churches that was closed. So we closed in December 31st of 2019, and technically the United Methodists owned our property. So we had, the congregation got together and we purchased the church in 2020, March the 11th. We got the deed on it, and then we just decided to call it the Odessadale Church and drop the whole Methodist Episcopal part out of it. So since then, we have technically, the congregation owns the church, and of course the cemetery was separate anyway. It was in a trust. So the property is now separate from the United Methodist. If you look on the internet, there is a historical churches, rural churches, but you look on the Odessadale Church, Odessadale Methodist Church, you'll find there's a link, and they talk about this entrance to the church. I had never thought about it, but they said this was pretty unique architecture in the way this thing is set up. Of course, we have a belfry, and I can remember the hole here where the rope came through, and there's no bell up there now, but it's quite a structure. It certainly held a pretty good size bell up there, and I assume they rang it on Sunday. But this is supposed to be something quite unique to churches, to have an opening on the side like this. As we talked about earlier, everything in here is pretty much original. The only thing we've had to do was roof, and we repaired part of the back wall. You remember that on the outside where it was buckling out. I mentioned Johnny, and when we get to the cemetery, Johnny passed away, I think, reading the thing on the slab, Johnny must have had some type of infirmity, and she passed away in '96. She was 6 years old. As far as I know, this window was original in this church, and we've been told that some of the colors here will never be able to reproduce again. This little Sunday school table, the teacher sat here and all of us sat around it. I don't know how long it's been here. It was here when Brother was here. It was here when I was here. We had different teachers, but we always had our little Sunday school set up here with this table. So it's been here as long as I can remember. I mentioned that we found the books in this cabinet here, just nobody had ever gone through it before. I want to mention the pews here. I assume, do you know if they were made for the church? We really don't know that, but they've never been changed as far as I can tell. The window here has been here since '42. It is in memory of Cornelius Marchman Harman. Cornelius is the one that primarily built this church. So they've got a window here for him, and we have a window for his grandson, Bobby, to the left, and the only other special window is one for Mother and Daddy over here at where we sit. Don't forget Mom and Daddy. Thank you. We still have children that come, and they meet up here in our little chairs rather than going to the back. And when the preacher comes, she has a special service for those folks over here. Now, you can see the wires. Can you get the wires in this thing where we had to pull the church together? And it really did. It pulled the whole thing back together. So it's pretty solid at this point. And this piano, I think, has a 1913 date on it. So it's been here for quite a while. I don't know of anything that changed on the pulpit other than putting in new carpet, but as far as I know, this is the original stand here, and that's a pretty old Bible there as well. The picture of Jesus came in much later, I'd say the 50s or the 60s for that picture, because I don't really remember it being here. I think that's most of the thing. The other thing they documented or they talked about was the, is it called wainscot here? And they talked about that as being somewhat unique, where they've got this set up all across the church with the darkened wood and it going down rather than across. So that was something that seemed to be important to the historic folks when they came in and looked at the church. The other thing you'll note is we have a... Oh yeah, we had a choir. Sometimes it was 3 people, but they used to put the choir chairs back up here, and we actually had 3 or 4, 5, 6 folks singing, 5, 6 folks singing. I don't remember that as well as he does. He's a lot older. But if you look at the ceiling, it looks like we're letting it deteriorate, but the problem is we found out that there was so much soot coming from that pot-bellied stove that it just coated that ceiling in soot, and paint will not stick to it. So if we ever want to fix it, somebody's going to have to sand that whole thing back down to bare wood, and that's going to be quite a job. So I'm just saying we live with what we've got here. Otherwise, we try to keep everything painted up and looking nice. And I think that's most of the things in the church that we have, that changes we've made, but most of it is basically original. We do have the heaters here So it's pretty comfortable here in the wintertime if we come up and light them a little before church. But summertime, I remember we used to open these windows. We used to open them, and we had broomsticks to hold those things up, but they don't open anymore, so it gets rather warm in here. Yeah, we went ahead. We got scared something might happen, so we put plexiglass all around on all the windows on the outside. I would just hate for anything to happen to those. Even that glass, I've been told, is pretty hard to get if we had, matter of fact, you can't get it if we had to repair some stuff. So, anything else I've forgotten, brother? Okay. Yeah, let's look at the outside of the church. We talked about putting the wires underneath the church. You can see the pilings, which are pretty much 3-foot cubes that are holding this church up. And there's a lot, of course, those are on the outside. There's some underneath there too. So the whole church is built on that. But you can see one of these wires right here that runs underneath. And we've got 4 of those that run underneath the church as they do in the top of the church. That looks like it needs painting, it needs pressure washing. We've got good solid paint on it, and that's the plexiglass we put in the windows. We had to have all these pilings. They look good, but they've been replaced. And the original rock is under there. We just had them rebuilt and made sure the church was stable so it doesn't bow out anymore like it did. Do need to have it pressure washed. It'll take care of all this stuff that's on it. There's a little bit of dispute that I had with the surveyor when we came in here in 2020. Had to do another survey. They have the property listed as ending right here. I don't think that's correct. I think the property actually included these sets of graves here. And so we had a set of graves that were associated with the church when it was first built. This is Johnny. Johnny is the first one. Of course, she died in September of '96. She's the first one buried here. And then the graveyard grew from here. There is another link out on the internet called Historic Rural Cemeteries. And I was reading it, and I didn't realize there's 115 cemetery plots, graves here in this church, and they name every one of them. Mary Ann is in there, so she passed away in 17, and so it's up to date if anybody wants to look at that. And it has, instead of her grave, it has her picture in there as well. So that's Claude Jr.'s wife. And but these are some of our kin folks. The Glanton, J.A. Glanton, was one of the original members of the church. These are some Harmans here. Merriman Harman is back in the back. He was an original member. Cornelius, who built the church, is down here. So we've got, I guess, up until this point, we've got 4 generations of folks buried back here, and some original members of the church that were here. And of course, the cemetery extended off the property, and it was set up in 1983. Claude Jr. helped set that up as its own entity. So it is an entity separate from the church. And you've got some graves here that the people that founded the church and were members of the church that moved away. Like the Glantons were the ones that they owned a couple of things here, but they owned the hardware store, the one we moved down to the home place, and general store back then. Yeah, they had just about everything in there. Yeah, they had a couple of those here. So when those moved away, but they still call this place home. You've got some Evans here. I'm not sure. They really were on the other side of the county on this thing, but those are the big obelisks here that we've got. Some of the Peavies, some of the folks that died a little early. This is William Claude Peavy, and he died at a pretty young age there. So We've got one here. We always put flowers here. We didn't know what this was, but if you look at, we figured it out. If you look at the way this comes out, there's a child buried here. And if you look at the dates on the lady here, the Renfro, it looks like she died in childbirth, and they put the child here. Calvin said that there was a child buried here. I did not know that. I didn't know why it went out that way. But you can see it has borders. I think the original cemetery went to that borderline right there. In the deed, it says that it extends to a rock. is a boundary marker, and I think that set of rocks is right over there. So it actually goes up through some of these trees. And but the Obulus were the Evans and the Partridges. Again, I said those were the folks, the bigger families that came in, the ones that had the money and supported. They had the plantations and supported this church and all of it moving into the area. So the Dillards that helped run the church are over here. All that's Partridges. Our family is back here in the back corner here, the Merrimans and some of the other leaders in the church. Your family is back there too, by the way. You've got some folks back over here related to you. That cedar tree is probably an original tree. The rest of the trees probably clear, because I would imagine this was a cotton field at one point in time. So all these other things grew up after the cemetery was here, all these oak trees. But we still have room for more folks if anybody wants to come out. We can cut down some trees and put them in here if they want to do that. I actually had a request from your father to look at that too. So plenty of room for y'all if you want to come back. But some of these people, the names are vaguely familiar. They were here. But the whole family is like we said, I'm not sure what they did. They may have had farms, but so many of them just moved out. Mother said you could buy land for $5 an acre, after the boll weevil. People just left and just didn't have the support that we once had for the church. Anything else? We've got some children buried here, that one, and couple of lambs on some properties. You have a cousin infant that's buried over here, cousin Pearl, Luther's child. They lost a child as well. So this is, from our family's perspective, this is the third cemetery. The first cemetery of the original 1828 folks is about a half mile, 3/4 of a mile back that way. It's not marked. The second cemetery was some of the original folks that went to the Mountville area churches, is over at the old home place. It's called the Harman Cemetery. Some of the JC that we mentioned is over there. Calvin's over there. And Robert Watson is over there as well. We talked about him. And then this was the third one, started with Johnny in 1896 and 1897 and grew from there. If anybody ever comes and wants to verify what I'm saying, there's an 1893 grave, an 1893 grave on the Evans. But I'm very sure that was not here when he died, that they must have moved him. Just somebody wants to dispute that, because this would have been in the middle of nowhere at that point in time. Let me wrap this up by saying just a few things here. I'm the sixth generation Harman to live on the place. I'm the fourth generation Harman to come to this church. And this church has been through a lot of trials and tribulations, particularly in the 1970s when a lot of us, me included, were gone off working somewhere. And we had a very low attendance. And we still had some dedicated people, Calvin and Calvin Sr., to keep this church going at that point in time. And I really appreciate it, because this church is really, a district superintendent asked us once why we cared so much about the church, and it's just really a place that's home from a worship standpoint to many of us. We've had several generations to come here. After me, we still have 4 generations coming to this church as we speak. We've had weddings here. We've had christenings here and new people to join as the younger folks come in. So it is just really a place of worship, a place where we feel comfortable even though it's very small. The work that we did on the church, we kind of thought and still believe that this church can easily be here for another 100 years plus. And we would hope that it would still be a place of worship at that point in time. We can't control that, but we always want new members to come in. We just love our younger people being here as part of the future and hope that they'll continue to worship here. And I want to thank you, Tim, for coming in and documenting this. Hopefully this will be give some history of the church, but why we're still here and why we want to be here in the future. Most of us will unfortunately be in the back here a few years from now, and a long time from now, excuse me. But I would hope that the church would still be here, would be a place of comfort, a place of worship for those in the future. And again, thank you very much for documenting this for us.